Just to introduce myself, my name is Jacqueline and I'm the Community Manager of Canada's Open Data Exchange. I work here at the Data Hub. Kevin Tour is one of my colleagues. He's on the panel as well. So today we're here to talk about Stratford's Smart Parking Pilot Project. So I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists. So as I mentioned, Kevin Tour is VP Strategic Initiatives at Communitech and Managing Director of Canada's Open Data Exchange. The current focus for both the Strategic Initiatives team at Communitech and Canada's Open Data Exchange is helping entrepreneurs and companies develop and deploy their data-driven innovation game plans. So from FoxNet, we have John Chiappetta. He's head of IoT for North America. So FoxNet is one of the leading IoT and smart solutions providers in North America, and he worked with 11X on the Stratford Smart Parking solution. So from City of Stratford, we have Naeem Khan. He's the manager of IT and business systems at the City of Stratford. Stratford's significant investment in digital infrastructure and efficient use of a public-private partnership has paid extraordinary dividends, as Stratford was recently selected as the first Canadian city to test connected vehicles. The City of Stratford has made great strides towards becoming Canada's next international technology hub. And then finally, Ryan Hickey is the COO and co-founder of 11X, Canada's first and only coast-to-coast LoRaWAN network optimized for the Internet of Things. So thanks for coming out today. Just before we get into the panel discussion, I'd just like Naeem to introduce what the project was for those of us here that might not have heard much about it or don't really know what the goals were. And then he'll also talk about the open data component of the project, and he'll explain what this is behind me here. Thanks, Naeem.
Okay. So the project itself is, it started last year in fall. From the technical perspective of the project, we had 3 high-level phases. The top 3 phases were, the first one was to implement the LoRaWAN gateway and installation of the 78 parking pucks in the downtown core area of the city. The second piece was to have an analytical platform in front of or behind it that we can use within the city to now look at the dashboard and look at the different aspects of the data. And the third piece was to release the data open to the public. So what I have behind me is the open data dashboard. It actually is showing me the current view of the open data right now. This is the real-time, I should say near-time information. You can see it is 90% occupancy, means out of 78 parking pucks, we have about 70 of those being currently full. If you switch to the historical view, you will see that so the historical view shows the year and the month information. So if you select May, so we started collecting the data beginning of May, and all the data you can see and download into HTML, CSV, XML, and or JSON. The JSON currently gives you the structure of the data, but it's not finalized yet. We are working towards a near-time data release for the open data component, but that will need to be wrapped around some sort of authorization from the city as well. But you can go here and get the historical information.
Thanks. So now we're going to get started with the panel portion of this session. So first we're going to touch on the topic of planning for smart cities, and Naeem is someone who can talk directly to that. So Naeem, I just want to ask you, why is it important for cities to engage in smart community strategies?
Sure. Good. I think that's a very good question. Every city should encourage the smart community initiative. It is ever-changing world of technology itself, and as a government, you want to look at innovative ways to deliver services to your citizens. Smart parking project is one of the example. What we are going to use this data within the city. We have a dashboard that provides us information in terms of KPIs. So the 3 KPIs that we built around the analytics was the occupancy rate, the average time a vehicle was parked, and the throughput of the vehicles. So far, we have over 21 million transactions that has been taken place on those 78 parking spaces. Out of those, the analytics that we receive and the parking management that they're looking at those dashboards, and they will be making decisions or recommending those decisions back to council. The great example is when we look at the month of May, we see that the average amount of time a vehicle was parked was about 33 minutes, and the overall occupancy was 51%. That's a good information to have, because our metered parking today is 4-hour meter parking. So information like that, and over time you start to see trends, and that data is very helpful for us because it's the fact, and we can take that information and then provide recommendations on any problem or questions or concerns back from council, and that's very valuable information for cities.
So again, for Naeem, other municipalities might be wondering, how do you get internal buy-in for something like this?
So with regards to this project, it started last year in fall. I believe there were 4 real good factors that worked in terms of getting the buy-in from the city. One was analytics. Parking in the city downtown core is certainly our metered parking. We want to measure the analytics and get the data out of that. So having parking sensors is great to do. The second piece was to get another network layer within our downtown core, so LoRaWAN. So we established a LoRaWAN gateway and the connectivity. Now, the third one was certainly the funding from Canadian Open Data Exchange, and it is a pilot. We are not going out and doing all 800 plus parking spaces that we have. We are doing 10% of that. So we are doing a test. We're going to see how it will work, how we can use the data. But we gain a lot out of this. We gain a lot of learning around the analytics, learning around a newer technology like LoRaWAN, integrating IoT towards that. And we gain all this expertise, which certainly will be helpful moving forward.
Thanks. So I've got one more question for Naeem related to smart cities. So what is often overlooked when municipalities or governments approach these type of initiatives? Can you tell us about any challenges or anything unexpected and how you would mitigate these challenges in the future?
So I think that's a very good question. We had a lot of challenges. A project like this, when you get into it, you start to think that, well, we're going to see this dashboard. But by the time you get into the project and you design the dashboard, a lot goes into it. Partnerships, certainly the partnership with the Open Data Exchange for funding, with our partners like 11X and FoxNet to build the platform. We had initial challenges to actually get the hardware and the parking sensors to be installed in the ground, challenges around the analytics. So certainly there are a lot of challenges, but as a team, we always came together, and it was a great learning process.
Thanks. So the next section of the panel discussion is going to be about startup and scale-up involvement. So for this section, we're going to chat with John and Ryan specifically. So I'm just going to start by asking, how can startups and smaller companies compete against larger players when it comes to delivering smart initiatives like this project? And I'm not going to pass you the catch box. Sorry.
I can start with that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Essentially, the smaller players in this field like 11X and FoxNet, we can be more agile. So a lot of the stuff we can do customized. We can partner. The partnering thing is a big thing because larger corporations like IBI, the one who presented this dashboard, we use them as the integration tool that we make work with the 11X system, and then together they use our expertise in certain areas to build up their programs. So essentially, when it comes to competing with the big guys, partnering is key. You have to use what you have, and then you have to expand on it by partnering with others.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Partnering is very important, and smaller companies can partner more quickly, more easily. Another thing that smaller companies might have an advantage on is kind of fitting in more with the structure of cities today. Cities are a very complex sale. We're going to talk a little bit more about it, I think, in the next question. But one thing that's apparent is that it's very siloed. So you have the transportation department, and you have ECDev and a bunch of other departments that don't really share the same budgets and have the same mandates. So a smaller company can narrow in on a niche that, like parking, for example, where you're going after pilots of 78 parking spots in this specific example. And for FoxNet and 11X, smaller type companies, we're more than willing to partner and make it work. Bigger companies aren't going to lift a finger for that amount of money, to be frank. They're going to go after $1 million deals. And they're going to go into cities and try to jam their platform or their technology down the city's throat, to be really blunt, when the city may not actually need that. So I think that's one advantage smaller companies have.
Yeah, I think that's really important, to be honest, because everybody thinks the cities are just huge right now, and they are. But the thing is that no municipality across Canada or North America, for that matter, has the 5, 6, 7-figure budgets that these large corporations expect them to have. So these smaller pilots are what you need to get into. And because we'll jump at that opportunity where a larger corporation, like you said, will ram something bigger down their throat, that's a huge opportunity for us.
So a related question. So when it comes to the public sector, there exists certain barriers to entry, including long sales cycles. So what are some of the other barriers, and what seems to be the best way for private companies to engage with cities in spite of these barriers?
Want me to take that?
Sure.
There are a lot. I'll try to pick a couple examples. So yeah, we talked about silos, we talked about sales cycle and budgeting. Those are really the big ones in my mind. But there's lots of other ones too, and one of them that I've come across is flexibility. So let's take a specific example with parking. So let's say a company like Bosch. Bosch is a huge company, international company. They have parking pucks, but they're going to go into the city and they're going to, basically try to sell the entire solution, and it's going to be proprietary from top to bottom, and it's going to be very expensive. So that can be an issue because it doesn't fit in with the budget. So being flexible can really help with smaller companies being able to break down that barrier by saying, okay, we can use POC A, or parking pod A, parking pod B. We can partner with FoxNet on the dashboard, or you can do your own integration, or so it's that flexibility. I think is something that can help with the barriers.
Yeah, and I mean, the biggest barrier there is, and everybody knows it, is the RFP process. That seems to be the elephant in the room when we approach anything. And even any city you talk to, any municipality, they'll say the same thing. RFPs aren't conducive to innovation. And it's true. If you want to procure for a new truck in your fleet, then definitely that's the best method to do it. Gets you exactly what you want. But if you're in the realm of smart cities and you don't exactly know what you want, then how do you write an RFP? How do you define what you don't know? So that's a huge barrier. And it could be as simple as the extensive work that you have to put in to not only read these 30-page documents, but respond to these 30-page documents. The good thing with that is, as a smaller company, once you're past that barrier, then that same barrier that kept you out keeps everybody else out. So it's interesting. But you have to get creative in ways around, not necessarily circumventing the RFP, but get ways within the municipality, build relationships, have pilot programs, try to provide software as a service, or in this case maybe IoT as a service, where it's a subscription model, and that way you fly under the RFP radar, and you can get sign off at, let's say, the director level.
Thanks. So you've already sort of touched on the advantages of being a smaller company in this space, but maybe you can just reiterate what that competitive advantage is with IoT and smart city initiatives, to sort of reiterate that.
Yeah, the competitive advantage that we really have is the fact that we're not going to give you an off-the-shelf solution. We're going to come in, we're going to assess your needs, we're going to figure out exactly what you want and how that plays into your larger strategy, and then we're going to give you something that's custom tailored to that. We're not going to say, okay, here's our platform and throw that at you and make you work within our world. We actually work within your world, and when I approach municipalities, we focus on three things. We want to raise the quality of life for their citizens, we want to improve economic development, and we want to provide efficiencies. And those three things resonate across all municipalities. As long as we can drive that to their annual plan or strategy, that's really what we're looking to do.
Yeah, I think part of the things that we talked about before with the silos and being focused on a niche area. So if you wanted to start a focus area, one of the things actually we're collaborating on with FoxNet being smart parking, then you can provide a complete smart parking solution. Again, with flexibility built in, not just flexibility on the technology, which is important, but flexibility on the business model. As John mentioned, maybe it's better to fit into an OpEx budget or a CapEx budget, and so I think that's really the advantage of going in and not necessarily trying to jam smart parking down. I mean, if they don't need smart parking, that's fine, but a lot of cities do need smart parking, so you find those cities and you try to address their needs.
And I can't underscore partners enough. Partnerships are what's key. We are really good at innovation. We have no desire to build our own hardware. So we actually want to look to partner with companies like 11X who do the hardware, or different companies like IBI who do the front-end tools, and we make them all work together because that's really what our bread and butter is. We're not trying to dominate the world. We actually want a piece of a much larger pie, so that's what we try to do to get there.
Thanks. So now we're going to talk about economic development opportunities that stem from a project like this. So I'm going to talk to Kevin and John. So what kind of economic development opportunities could arise from this specific smart parking project or from similar smart city initiatives?
So maybe I'll start by saying why did we get involved with this and why do I think this is important? ODX has been in the open data game for over 3 years now. And our role is to connect those that want data with those that have data. And what we found out very early on is that from a data provider's perspective, i.e. governments at all levels, success is measured by the number of data sets that were made available on their web portals. And that, agreed, that is a measure, but what it doesn't take into account is the use of that. So what I like about this particular project is that I see this as an opportunity to build a business case for creation and use of open data starting from a problem, as opposed to here's some data, let's throw it up in a web portal and see who consumes it. The notion of how open data fit into this supply chain was integrated right from the very beginning. So I've got a foot in Stratford and in the Waterloo region too, and I know that in Stratford, parking matters because tourism is a big part of Stratford's economy, and there's nothing worse than having people that coming to the theater struggling with finding, where do I park before I can start the best part of my experience. And so that's where this whole initiative started, and parking made sense. What I liked about it is that we were able to bring together or be part of a collaboration between 11X and FoxNet and the City of Stratford to work together towards solving this problem. Is it perfect? It's not perfect yet, but it lives on in multiple ways in that not only do we have a solution so then somebody coming into town can pull this up on their smartphone and get a better idea of where should I target finding some parking, but the open data that will live on in perpetuity now becomes a very interesting and vital resource for building the next generation of not only smart parking, but maybe this information data can be used for other smart city solutions. And we love working with the City of Stratford because they're small enough, they're hungry enough, they're eager enough, and most importantly, they had the problem that needed to be solved. So this is an exercise in building that supply chain around open data for a purpose and for a specific use right from the outset. And so from an economic development perspective, it's not only is important for this particular problem that we set out to solve, but then it sets up starts to set up the ecosystem, the partnerships and the mechanisms by which to look at the next problem, and then the next problem.
And just building off that, I mean, right away, we have two companies right here that they engage with. That's economic development. Building off what Kevin says, once the data gets out there, then you have a whole local, sector of entrepreneurs and startups and scale-ups in any city that can now use this data and create the apps. At the end of the day, no municipality is in the business of creating apps or programs or anything like that. But if you put the data out there, then your citizens and whether they're just, eager and they want to do a hobby on the side, or whether they're entrepreneurs and have a business, they can use the data to then create applications, which everybody uses every day on their phone, and then put that back out to the public, which generally raises the quality of life again for their citizens. On the flip side, when you talk about anything IoT, let's just take this parking project for an example. It's an art of the possible. It's not a one-trick pony. So although, yes, it tells you, here's a parking spot that's open or closed. But then what's beyond that? How do we take this to the next level? One, you can integrate this with mobile parking apps. So I could, let's use Honk Mobile as an example. I could then go to Honk Mobile and say each one of these pucks has unique IDs. So now you can take your parking lot booking system down to the parking spot level. So that's one thing. You can put in, if you have your own city application, you can now put in wayfinding. Let's say your citizens have the application, they pull into a parking spot, you now get notifications that maybe there's cheap beer or wings at a local bar just around the corner. So then you can pull things that way. It's one of those conversations where, how do we go beyond this? If you want to talk about fleet, sure, maybe you want to track your fleet and see where stuff is, but let's that just slap on another sensor. You can also do vibration, and now you do road pavement quality as you're driving along. So it doesn't just stop here. It's building on what you build. And it's enabling and empowering your citizens to really take it to the next step. Let them build the apps, let them use the data.
Great, thanks. So before we move into the question period, I have one more question that I'm going to direct to Kevin and Naeem. So after a municipality implements a smart city initiative like this, how can the local community keep the momentum going?
Okay, so I think the local community is very critical to any smart community initiatives. I think something like this, what we would like to see is feedback from the community. The more they're involved is better. The more feedback that we get is better. And in terms of the usage of an application or the application that can spin out of the open data, we would like to probably go back to the community and ask a question is what you would like to see more of this, right? So as a city, we certainly have to do a better job communicating back and forth with our citizens to gather that information, because at the end of the day, you want to build an inclusive, smart community, not just build a smart community because you want to be smart.
And for us, again, a big part of the reason why we got involved with this project, as important as it is for the city to have a viable solution for a problem that they're experiencing, really the driving force behind it for us was to get FoxNet and 11X to the table, to get embedded and to get experience and to get access to a customer with a real problem, because our success is measured on the success of the customers that we serve. So I'm thrilled that now there's an evolving partnership between these two small companies that could blossom and evolve into something better and something different. And that's what keeps, I think that's what will keep the momentum going. I think it always has to start with solving the problem, so let's make sure we solve the right problems, because then that will get you the right exposure, it'll prove, and it creates a sustainable ecosystem as well. That's why starting with the problem is so important, because if this becomes viable, becomes sustainable, then that provides the mechanism not only to say, look, this is successful at solving this problem and it may put some money back into the city's budget, but then it provides fuel for the next one and the next one. And of course, the times we're living in right now, when we're talking about AI and machine learning and all of these wonderful technologies, which are completely useless unless you have a purpose for using them, data is the fuel for all of that. So the fact that we're continuing to create a source of data that not only works to quantify a problem you want to solve, but provides the inputs for creating those solutions. And it's constantly refreshing. It's not stale. It's ever evolving. And that will only be augmented with other sources of data, maybe other sources of open data or other sources of data that are fed into the creation of a solution for the next problem. So I think it's providing those very valuable resources. And we, as ODX, will continue to support entrepreneurs and companies through the other and various other mechanisms that we already do that. So I think that's how you keep this going, but it starts with making sure success is measured not by the number of data sets that are made available by the City of Stratford, but the fact that they're using and creating an open data set that solves a problem that will feed into the creation and solution of other problems going forward.
Thanks. So that's it for the panel portion of this session, but I know some of you submitted questions when you registered for this event. So I'd just like to get those questions answered first, and then we'll go into an open Q&A period where you can ask any questions that have come up in your head during the session. So anyone who wants to answer the question, feel free. So someone would like to know more about commitment to network security and options for power sensors. I guess this would be a Ryan question.
Sounds like a Ryan question.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. That's an excellent question. Right now in the pilot phase, which seems to be the IoT industry generally is in the pilot phase, unfortunately security is almost an afterthought, but obviously when we scale, when we roll out, this is when it's going to become very important. For the LoRaWAN technology, which is what 11X has deployed, we authenticate every sensor with our network, and we also, that's on every transaction, and we also encrypt the data with 128-bit AES encryption. So, and what's interesting about this network technology is the data is encrypted all the way from the parking pod, in this case, or wherever the sensor might be, all the way to the customer's back end. So as a network provider like 11X, we can't even see the data, which is unique. It's not even like that in the cellular world, right? It's in the clear as soon as it hits the cellular network. So in fact, LoRaWAN technology is more secure. If anyone wants to follow up with a more specific security question, because security I could go on for an hour, so I'd be happy to answer more specific questions. But that's a general overview of how we manage security of the data coming from the sensors. In terms, there's a low power aspect, right? So low power, so that's almost different from security. The reason why it can be done with such a low power device though is because LoRaWAN itself was built from the ground up for battery operated sensors. So it's taken that into consideration from the very beginning. It's not something that's bolted on over top. It's part of the actual low level protocols. Sorry if that was too technical for some people, but.
No, that's great, thanks. So you sort of touched on this in your answer, but someone's curious to know, why was the decision made to use pucks as sensors versus cameras or another type of sensor? Why were those specific pucks chosen?
I can take that. So, if you use a camera, there is a concern with privacy because camera captures everything around the vehicle as well. So even though you can have a camera very high up, you still have that benefit of doubt that a person's image is within it. So one of the due diligence as a government we always have to do is we want to make sure that the privacy of the citizens and the privacy through camera is the highest level of infringement of privacy. So you really want to stay away from cameras unless it's your own parking lot and you want to measure that. So sensors, they are embedded in the asphalt. They are in a way really dumb. They don't do anything except they let you know an event, right? So they'll let you know if there is a vehicle parked or not parked. So that's a great example for that.
Can I add just a quick thing? The parking pods themselves sense the magnetic field above the puck, so they're extremely accurate. Compared to a camera, you could also have, besides privacy issues, you could have inaccuracies. So for example, if it's snowing, can you really tell what cars are parked where? And then there's also the cost. So put cameras everywhere, and then they all have to be backhauled, they all have to be powered. These pucks can be put in the ground for 7 to 10 years and on batteries. So they're very quick and easy to install, and the maintenance is very cheap as well. So from a cost accuracy perspective, it's by far the best trade-off.
And I think it also came down to this project. This project, it needed to be quick, it needed to be up and running. It was relatively small, so this is an easy solution. When you talk about any parking project, if you want to get specific, to parking. You can have vertical scanners, which is what we have. You have to be careful because in Canada you can't have them sitting above the ground or else snowplows will get them. So these ones are flush or below. You can have horizontal scanning sensors, or then up top you can have stuff like LiDAR or 2D. But yeah, in the States and in the US, you can use the video camera to really tag a lot of the parking spots, and it has been done in San Francisco. They just, instead of implementing new sensors, the camera's already there, they just write new software to do it. In Canada, unfortunately, we don't have that luxury.
And just to, on the installation time, it was about 15 minutes per puck to actually install them.
Great. So now that the project's up and running, the data is available, does Stratford plan to expand to more parking spaces with this project?
So the pilot will run for 6 months. So that's the of the pilot. So hopefully it will run until end of December. Within that time, we will be certainly looking at the dashboards that we have internally. We'll be looking at the KPIs that we receive from the dashboard, and what we'll do is at some point we'll be going back to the council with recommendations on how we have used the data so far, how citizens have used the data, tourists have used the data, and with that recommendation we'll kind of decide on next steps. It's not decided yet what's going to happen, but that's why it is a pilot, and we'll continue to look at the data and work towards it.
All right. So now we're going to open the floor up to your questions. We actually have this throwable microphone called a catch box. So I'm going to throw it over to whoever has a question, and then you can throw it to the next person. Don't be afraid, it won't hurt anyone. It's plush, so it's not going to hurt you. So yeah, we'll open up the floor to questions. Okay, I'm going to throw it over to you, okay?
Okay, got it. Is it working? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Just wanted to know, like because this is an open platform, so what are the services or APIs available for developers?
So that piece haven't been done. The open data is on the historic side of data at this point, so you can go back and download a whole month of data for all the parking IDs and how many minutes a parking spot was taken per hour. So it's an hourly data for the whole month of May. You can go and download that, and you can build applications on that. It will be more around the analytics. We are certainly working with FoxNet and IBI to put together a SDK wrapper around these data and authentication so that you can access the data through proper authorization, and that data will certainly be able to be used for real-time navigation apps for you want to build, or an app that's already out there.
So it's important to keep in mind for this, it was a proof of concept, so we wanted to prove that you don't have to be in Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver to actually do this type of initiative. So in the future, we want to hear that feedback, we want to know what everybody wants, and then we can incorporate that into our future plans and how we grow it. But right now, we want to get it up and running so it can be done, and then show what we're collecting right now, just for full transparency purposes.
And just a follow-up question. By what time do you think will the SDK and everything be ready? Like any?
So that's still under development right now. We don't have a proper timeline to give, but ideally, sometime over the next few months when we're deep into the pilot and we have some insights ourselves.
All right. So I gather you'll tie this into Google and Waze, and you'll be able to drive into Stratford and find a spot pretty quickly. And so you have an advantage. Is that how it's going to work?
Well, if the SDK is out there, we hope Google or Waze could use it. So the best example is today when I drove in, I had the address through Eventbrite. I had it on my navigation system.
Right.
It literally stopped in front of this building. What it should have done, it should have, when I left my origin tour destination, it should have said, well, there is a free parking and there is a paid parking. Which one do you prefer? I would say free parking or paid parking. It will then route me to the closest parking. So right now the navigation systems are actually lacking that parking feature.
Okay.
And that's really great that we are already working towards creating the data for them to look at. Maybe there is not enough sensors out there that have all this data, and maybe there's not enough standardization. So that's something that Kevin, ODX can look at, standardizing that open data so that the corporations or anyone can use it, because now there is a standard around it, right? So,
sorry.
yeah, so I was just giving an example of GTFS data, which is a data that all transit systems use. You can get the GTFS stream, you can build an app around it because it's global feed.
So second question is, I walk or drive in, and now I can pay at a meter, and when I come back, I can say stop, and I'm good. Is that how it's going to work eventually? It's going to tie into the revenue generation.
Those are the opportunities I think you can look at. Right now, the way the data is, it's going to be more used for the city, to be honest, for analytical reasons. But the open data itself and the standardization around it will help to build more apps that will help the parking management through the payments or now attaching to a person. Right now, the data is not attached to any individual. It's attached to the parking space itself.
But it's designed, the system's designed in a way where that can be possible in the future when they want that. So again, now go back to proof of concept. Let's prove it can be done. In the future, when we want to expand on it, again, the city could build their own parking app. We'd probably favor partnering with somebody who already did it. As I mentioned earlier, Honk Mobile is pretty popular in this area. And then they can take that, and then for them, they can also complete the loop and send information back to the city. Right now, they can only tell the city that this license plate has paid for this lot. They have no idea if that license plate's still in that lot or where in that lot. So then, in the future, cities can understand usage patterns. So perhaps they paid for an hour, they left in 30 minutes. That's a 30-minute surplus where the spot's paid for, but it's not being used.
Yeah, so it's like Airbnb for parking.
It can be. The potential is there.
How long did the pilot take for you to execute?
Throw it.
So how long did your pilot take to execute from concept to I guess, pucks in the ground?
So we really started last year in fall. So I would say we get into the agreement around November timeframe, October-November timeframe. We had pucks in the ground in December. Then we were working on the network, building the IBI platform. It was about, I would say, about 6-month time frame from the start to finish that we can say, here is the released version, and the data that we have, the dashboards that we have, and the KPI that we build are good enough for us to work with.
Keeping in mind that was essentially the first of its kind, so all of us are going in this together, and it took that amount of time, basically because we were figuring out what do we need to include, what should be included in terms of KPIs, how do we want to display this data, and again, we have to put stuff around, as soon as data goes open, how do we define user licensing, essentially.
You talked about the procurement process. Could you walk us through how this particular pilot came through, if it's okay to share?
So this pilot went to the council as a proposal. The proposal was made with the assumption that the total cost of the pilot would be $100,000, and $50,000 of that cost would be funded by the Canadian Open Data Exchange, with specific phases within the proposal, what we are going to achieve, what the project looks like, what outcome we are looking at, and the definition of a pilot itself. And that's the procurement policy is there, but council has the authorization to say, go ahead or not, and where the budget was coming from. So for this particular pilot, the $50,000 cost for the city came from our parking reserves.
How did you go about selecting the sample size and the geography of where you're going to place the sensors? So wondering about the right approach to do something like that, knowing you get some information of what you're measuring, but then as you scale up, would the picture of what you learn be different based on perhaps high occupancy, making it big enough that there's low occupancy in some places? Maybe some of the thoughts around that approach.
Yeah, so that was actually being decided with working with our parking management staff. they really wanted to measure those streets that we have right now to kind of see, because there are assumptions. You can make assumptions, well, it's always busy at 2 p.m. But now we have data and we have consistent data. Well, let's see, is that assumptions true? So that's how those were kind of picked. If we want to expand, we know there are a couple other streets that we want to have more parking sensors, and we probably, maybe one of the recommendation will go ahead and kind of do that. But that's how we came up with those pucks, because they are the core in downtown. And those spots are the ones that are all metered parking as well, so there is no current analytics. We don't even have, when I say metered, it's like coin meter, so you don't go to a booth and use your credit card and pay by plate. We are not doing that. It's just coin meter parking. So that's another reason we like to choose those spots.
Essentially what it comes down to is business objectives. What are you looking to achieve? And that is based on the municipality. So if they just do a project for the sake of doing a project, they're not going to be able to measure if it's successful or not, because how did they do that? So if they're actually looking to achieve something strategically within their municipality, then they should design these kind of pilots around that. So what are they looking to understand better? What are they looking to get actual data from, instead of just looking out a city hall window saying, yep, busy. And that's where we come in, and we try to bring this holistic approach around. We're going to help you strategy, we're going to help you design it, so what do you want your users to feel when you do it, and then we actually implement it.
And one of Stratford's theaters, I don't know if it's on there or not, but it's on the corner of Downey and George or whatever it is. So it's right in the heart of where the problem exists. So what better place than is to quantify the depth and extent of the problem than right where it emanates from.
Anyone developed any apps yet on the data?
Because essentially this isn't public yet. Today will mark the first day that it'll be online and open to the public. So as of right now, they potentially could, but prior to this, we wanted to keep it a little bit locked down just to make sure we get all the bugs out of the way before we let the world at it.
But I can confirm that when this was announced a few months ago now it was, when we first went public with it, immediately I had some companies reach out to me and say, when can I get the data? I want to embed it in my platform. So there's an appetite.
And can you tell me anything about that appetite, like what sort of apps you're expecting?
Well, it's more, so this is around, I think in both cases they were building apps that were loosely stated around GIS apps. So, and what they see this as an opportunity to add richer information to what's going on and what are the dynamics of the core of the city built on top of their platform. So it's another value add for them, and getting this access to this data for free essentially allows them to add value to their app at no cost.
And one final question, why the number, I believe it's 78 pucks, or why did you settle on 78? It seems like a small number for a sample size for a pilot.
Money.
I can take that. So it is actually a good number for the geography of Stratford, where we are, and the measurement of those streets. Also, there's a cost to it, right? So our budget was $100,000. We know, ODX is funding $50,000. What we can do in that $100,000. So that's a major factor. We cannot go. I think around 76, 78 was the number that we were looking at, because we have cost on the infrastructure. We had costs on the pucks itself. We have to have the IBI platform, an analytics platform built on top, and we have a cost within the city to actually install them. So there is a little bit of cost, a minor cost, but there is a cost, and then there is cost around the resourcing of it, right? So that's where the number came from.
And just for some clarity, you said this is the first one in Canada, first Canadian city to install these pucks on this kind of network and share the data openly, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
To the best of our knowledge, it is.
And you said that those batteries will last 7 to 10 years, is that?
That's right.
Wow, okay.
And that's primarily because of the network.
That's right. That's the LoRaWAN technology that it operates on, as opposed to, say, LTE that your phone operates on, where the battery might last a couple weeks. So it's really about that wireless connectivity, enabling that low power consumption to give long battery life. And
to speak to the size of the pilot really quick, in terms of the 78 sensors, in the grand scheme of things, compared to how many parking spots are in a city, it does seem a little small at first glance, but what we're trying to do here is go after pilots, and To do that, we want to prove that this technology not only benefits the city, but benefits the citizens even more. But we don't want to risk significant capital to get this in there. And perhaps, let's say at the extreme end of things, the city's not interested. If they do a pilot, they can find out, they can say, does this work for us? Does it not work for us? And then they make a decision, yes, this works great, we want to expand. We're still unsure, potentially would be a second case, and they want to gather more data for a longer period of time and then reevaluate. Or two, you know what, we don't need this type of technology, let's just kill the program. And that way they don't risk, hundreds of thousands of dollars lighting up an entire city with parking. So it's a different way of approaching procurement, whereas before you see, especially in the IT side of municipalities, these 10, 20-year contracts of the federal payment system is the easiest one to point to. That still doesn't work, right? So they don't have to get in bed with me before they do a lot of this technology. They can test it out first.
But in terms of the project itself, regardless of what the outcome is, we learn a lot. And we gain a lot of the platform, the LoRaWAN platform that we have set up, it's not going to go away. The analytics that we have is not going to go away. Well, if the parking side of things or parking sensors didn't work out, well, let's see if something else works, right? So you now have a cost to now add a sensor, any other IoT sensor, on the same network, pull the data, do the analytics, you can do that. So we, as a city, we already gain a lot financially from the project itself because we already have the infrastructure, we have the funding through the project, and as a concept, as a proof of concept, is it going to work or not? We are going to test that.
And that's an interesting point because regardless of the municipality I talk to, it seems that it's inevitable that at some point in time in the future, they don't know when, but at some point in time they recognize that they will adopt this type of technology. So the fact that Stratford made the investment and got the backbone essentially in place, so now if they want to track their fleet, they can do it. If they want to, do traffic management systems, they can do that. If they want to do wayfinding throughout the city, maybe you walk by a certain spot and get a notification of a historic monument. You can do that. The backbone's there and it's already in place, so you don't have to be married to one initiative. You can try it, you can pilot it, and you can see if that's the right one for your city, either expand on it or go a different route.
So you mentioned the IBI platform, and I think you mentioned the backbone. I'm assuming they're one and the same thing. Can you describe it a little bit better?
So Steve is actually here from IBI. If you have any questions afterwards directly about IBI, he's in the corner there giving a wave. We chose that because we like that front end. Essentially, that's the dashboard. It cleans the data as it goes in, and it visualizes it in a great way. They have the specific connectors that we need when we're connecting to 11x's network, so we can pull data in. Essentially, we wanted this process to be up and running fast. We wanted it to be clean, and we wanted people to be able to download the information afterwards. And when we were going through and selecting vendors, that front end is the one that came out to us. And then beyond that, IBI agreed to partner with us. They're going down this road just as we are, so they're leveraging our knowledge. They're helping us with any events we need, like today with the food. So it was just a partnership that worked.
Yeah, so.
Teamwork.
So yeah, just wanted to know about the communication protocols which you're using. Are you using like Wi-Fi, GSM, Bluetooth?
Well, we're using a LoRaWAN technology, so it's specific to this type of application, this type of use case. It's designed from the ground up for these low power battery operated devices, and it's also very long range. So Wi-Fi, get a couple hundred meters, this can go 10 to 15 kilometers. So now you can put up a gateway and cover a very wide area pretty inexpensively. Yeah, does that answer your question? I'm happy to go.
Yeah.
I don't want to bore everyone else that doesn't care about the technology.
When you are expanding, then you plan to use the same LoRaWAN?
So that's an excellent question. So one of the advantages of LoRaWAN is that it's an international global standard that's backed by the LoRa Alliance, which we're a contributing member to. We're very active in that alliance. So what you're doing is you're leveraging an entire ecosystem that's adopted the standard, and it's being deployed all over the world. Like South Korea's 99% covered, France is completely covered, Tata Communications in India is, is covering like almost 1 billion people or whatever. So like there's lots of deployments around the world, and what's happening is a whole bunch of companies are developing solutions. Like for example, this parking project, you talk about partnerships, one of our partners is a parking pod manufacturer. That's what they do. They do the parking pod. We do the networking. IBI and FoxNet did the front end. So the advantage, to answer your question, is to leverage this entire ecosystem to bring other low-cost solutions, because you got the global scale happening in the background, to address other issues. So, Stratford's a very innovative city. They've adopted smart parking. They're also one of the few Ontario cities selected for autonomous vehicle testing. So you can imagine all the other sensors you could deploy within Stratford to help with the autonomous vehicle. Parking being one, obviously, if the vehicle knows what parking spot is empty, you can just drive to it, as opposed to having its cameras that are in the car try and go to each spot. Oh, no, there's a car there. Oh, no, there's a car there. So now you can start expanding that to all kinds of other sensors. Also water metering. So people's water meters today, there's no electrical going to that water meter, so you want a battery-operated adapter, if you will, to connect to that water meter. So now all of a sudden your dumb water meter that you've been going around some guy with a clipboard to take the reading is now connected to the internet, and that also works on LoRaWAN. There's no extra infrastructure installation. You just leverage what you've already installed, so it scales very well across a bunch of different verticals.
And as FoxNet, we also support the LoRa network through 11x, because essentially I can go out for the best examples. I talked to a municipality and they wanted to provide Wi-Fi for their low-income area. And I said, that's great. I said, that's fantastic. They gave them iPads, but they go home and they can't use them because they can't connect. So I said, no, that's fantastic, but you should also consider putting a LoRa node on as well, because then you have two networks, and in the future when you're ready to expand to sensors, you can attach the sensors to the LoRa network and not drain your Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is more expensive, and then your citizens aren't going to be happy if you slow their connections down because you want to measure snow depth on a sidewalk. So there's things that you have to think about that way as well.
Well, and that's why I want to go back to sort of our perspective is you have to start with the problem first, so then you can answer questions like, what network should I be using? Because if you put a puck in the ground and the battery dies in 2 weeks, well, you're not going to be yanking up the puck every 2 weeks to change the battery. And again, this is where, again, what I liked what has come out of this pilot project so far is it was based on a real-life implementation and allows us to solve problems using the right technologies as opposed to a technology-first solution. Because if it's a technology-first solution, then I think there's a higher likelihood it will be unsuccessful, because you're not doing it for the purpose of solving the problem. You're doing it because you fall in love with the technology. But this was, we knew what we wanted to do. We knew what we wanted to quantify. We had the partners that we could bring to the table that help us execute on that plan. And now we've got to a point where we've got the data that's showing up behind us in real time on the back wall that's proving that there's something out there, it's working, we're going to learn from it. And the point is, I think value starts to be delivered as soon as you connect the sensor to the network, because you now start quantifying your environment from which you can derive insights, which is really how you're going to drive the biggest part of the value proposition.
Okay, this will be the last question.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Oh,
Two more.
okay, well, go ahead. And we'll...
All right, so my question is about how this project formed, because I was late a little bit. When I came, you were explaining that cities do not need to write an RFP about a thing that they don't know what it is. And so I was wondering how this project actually began in the City of Stratford, and are you open to similar projects? Like, I know that the City of Stratford loses a couple of $1 million a year on water losses in the water mains. It's not huge comparing with other cities, but I want to see, are you open to these projects, or which channel we should go through to connect to the right people and decision makers about having a project that could reduce in 5 years half of that water leakage? Thank you.
Want me to take that? Okay. So in terms of the process, I've already answered that question. I can talk to you afterwards. In terms of the project itself, I think Kevin already mentioned that there has to be a need, right? So you have to have a need, you have to have a cause to get into a project like this before you start to go into that route. So if there is a need, and does the city itself has all the know-how about that, project itself. So something like smart parking, well, we know we want to collect analytics or data for these parking spots. But do we know exactly how are we going to do that? Well, we don't. It's totally new. The first thing everyone will say, well, put a camera and start to do some analytics. Well, that's not going to work. Or have a person do the old ways of getting some analytics. I think that's where you have to look into partnerships, right? If the city already have the expertise on some of these areas, then yes, you can do RFPs. Maybe after this process, maybe we could do an RFP now, moving forward, and say, well, now we have an RFP because now we learn from this experience and we can do an RFP, right? So that's kind of what I would say. I don't know about your specific question about the water, but yeah, we can talk later about that.
Yeah, so if there's still unanswered questions, Ryan, John, and Naeem will be sticking around. Kevin has a meeting to get to, but I'll also be around if you have any questions about ODX. So thanks to our online audience, thanks to everyone who came out to the Communitech Data Hub today. And again, if you have any questions, they'll be sticking around, and feel free to get more food. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.